Welcome back. Tonight I'm going to be making corn soup. This is another dish from Trinidad that I learned from my friend Federico. I've never made this in a pot smaller than 12 quarts, so if your pot is smaller than 12 quarts, you may want to cut the recipe in half or a third or whatever will accommodate the size vessel that you do have. We're going to fill the pot about half to 2/3 of the way with water, and we're going to add a good handful of salt to that. Probably 2-3 tablespoons of salt there. The first thing we want to do with this is get it onto the stove over high heat and let it come up to a boil. It's a lot of water, it's going to take a little while, so get that going while we do the other stuff. While we're waiting for that water to boil, we can go ahead and chop up our onion and garlic and peel and wash the potatoes and take care of the corn. I've got about 5 pounds of potatoes here, and just like we did in just about everything else I've done that has used potatoes. Peel them, chop them up in about 1-inch pieces, and throw them in a bowl of water until you're ready to use them. I've already worked on the onions and garlic. It's 1 large onion and 1 clove of garlic. Just a clove, not the whole head. And you want to chop them both up fairly finely. I've got 4 ears of corn here. After you've shucked and washed it, you just want to cut it into 1.5 to 2-inch long chunks. The cleaver comes in pretty handy for this. So can the mallet. Looking for pieces about like that. My water's come to a boil. Now I'm going to throw in 2 pounds of yellow split peas. The store I usually shop at never has yellow split peas. For some reason they only carry the green ones. If that's your case, you can use the green ones. I've done it before. It doesn't taste any different. It just looks a little more green than yellow. But I did go to a different store today just to get the yellow ones. Just for you. Because I care. Next thing we want to do is add the seasoning. Garlic and herb seasoning. Throw in about a tablespoon of that. About a teaspoon of dry ginger. And a tablespoon and a half of pepper. The recipe actually calls for fresh chives and fresh parsley. I forgot about that when I was at the store. Didn't pick them up. I've got some dry parsley flakes. It calls for 2 tablespoons of fresh parsley, so I'm only going to use 1 of the dry. And I don't have any dry chives, so we'll just go without. I'll go ahead and add the corn. You might want to add them one at a time like this, and rather than just dumping them in, so that you don't get splashed with boiling water. Also add in the onions and garlic. I had a question about making this from dried goods, or things that will last longer, instead of fresh corn that you have to shuck and all that garbage. You could buy a bag of those corn on the cob that's already chopped up into small pieces. Buy a bag of those, throw that in. That's one way to get around some of the fresh goods. Turn the heat down to medium, and we're going to let it cook for about an hour. You do want to stir it occasionally just to make sure that split peas aren't burning to the bottom of the pot or anything like that. And I've just been reminded that the season premiere of Heroes has just started, so I'm going to go watch that while this cooks. We've got about 15 more minutes until we're ready to move on to the next step in the pot, so we need to get going with the dumplings. It's really easy. I don't have exact measurements, unfortunately, but you get the idea. In this bowl, I have a half a cup of butter. To that, we're going to add about 5 heaping tablespoons of flour. Not an exact science here. And about 2 teaspoons of salt. We're also going to add warm water. And you just want to start working this with your hands until everything's incorporated together and you've got a nice dough. This is looking pretty dry. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more water. You want to basically get it so that you don't have any huge chunks of butter floating around in there. It's a pretty even mixture. And we're looking for a good, fairly stiff, doughy consistency. So I'm going to add another couple of tablespoons of flour. Basically, we're looking to get something about the consistency of Play-Doh. We're almost there. I just need just a little bit more flour. And the dough is done. I've got about 5 more minutes before we're ready to move on with the soup. And this is what the dough actually is going to look like. So after about an hour, the soup should look something like this. Now we're ready to throw in the potatoes. Of course, be sure to drain off the water that they've been sitting in first, because we really don't need to add any more liquid to this. I'll let this go about 10 more minutes, let the potatoes come up to temperature, and then we'll move on to the next step. At this point, some things will start burning to the bottom. Don't worry about that too much. Every time I've made this, I've ended up with something burned to the bottom of the pot. As long as you don't scrape too hard, you won't end up with burnt crab floating in your soup, and therefore burnt flavor in your soup. Just scrape gently, and whatever's loose enough will come off on its own, and whatever's stuck on will stay stuck on until you wash the pot when you're done cooking. now that the potatoes are up to temperature, we want to start adding the dumplings. They should be about this size. As you make them, just drop them into the pot. This dough will make quite a few dumplings. If you don't like so many, maybe only use half of it. Freeze the other half and thaw it out the next time you make this. Next, you want to add a can of coconut milk. It's a good idea to give it a good shake, because while it's sitting on the shelf of the store, it can kind of separate into the solids and liquids. Yeah. Give this a taste, make sure it's seasoned well. Mine needs more salt, it often does. Now that I have the soup seasoned to my liking, we're going to let it go for about another 45 minutes. A lot happens over that final 45 minutes we let this cook. The starches from all those ingredients in there that all come out and begin to thicken the soup really well. And it looks completely different. In fact, here's what the pot looks like now. You do want to be a little extra vigilant over those last 45 minutes as this cooks, because things will tend to stick to the bottom of the pot even more. You're going to want to stir this probably every 5-10 minutes or so. When it's done, you will want to get that off the heat as soon as you can, just to try and reduce the amount of further burning of stuff onto the bottom of the pot. I tend to keep an eye on it, stirring it every few minutes or so, just to make sure things don't continue to burn as the bottom of the pot's still hot, before I transfer it to a bowl to keep in the fridge. And this is what the final product looks like. Thanks again, I'll see you next time. Hey, I just got home, I'm gonna heat up some of those leftovers. I normally don't bother with showing you guys the leftovers, but I thought I'd make the exception with this corn soup because it sets up unbelievably when you stick it in the fridge. In fact, it looks like this. What you actually want to do if you want this to be back to a soup consistency is put a little bit of water into the bowl that you're heating. Probably only 2 or 3 tablespoons of water per serving is all you need. Well, it just depends on how loose or thick you want your soup. I choose to err on the side of having not quite enough water in there when I heat it back up, because I can always add a little more water to loosen it some more if I want. Thanks, enjoy.